At the edge of the Florida Keys, where the sand turns golden and the sea whispers its secrets, a woman swings gently in a hammock each evening, never alone, because beside her, without fail, lies a bobcat, not caged, not collared, wild, proud, with eyes like storm clouds and a past soaked in pain. They say wildcats don't trust humans, that they don't show affection, let alone sleep beside someone like a loyal companion. But this one does. His name is Bramble. And no one, not even the woman who saved him, knows why he came back from the sea that night, or what really happened to him during those 3 days he vanished. This isn't a story about taming the wild. It's about when the wild chooses you, and what happens when grief speaks the same language across species. But before we begin, I ask you to subscribe, not just for the story, but because somewhere out there, someone else needs to believe that healing can come in the most unexpected form, even with paws and claws. The first morning she saw him, the tide had crept unusually high, soaking the fringe of the beach hammock where Delilah lay half asleep, clutching her coffee mug like a lifeline. The air was still, heavy with salt. You could hear the hush of the Gulf of Mexico whispering against the sand, just like every other morning since she'd moved into the weather-worn trailer perched at the edge of the Keys. But something was different. There were prints. At first, she thought they belonged to a large dog, spread wide, claws barely touching the sand. They tracked from the seagrass, past the driftwood pile, then curved toward the hammock, and stopped, directly beneath where she'd been sleeping. Delilah sat up slowly. Her heart thudded once. Then she spotted him. He was standing maybe 30 feet away, half concealed by the palmettos. Not big, but unmistakably wild. Short, tawny fur clung in rough patches across lean muscles. His ears were tufted, alert. His eyes were watching her. A bobcat. She knew what he was. Had drawn dozens in her sketchbooks back when life felt normal. Back before Caleb. Before the storm. Before everything that was soft inside her had been swallowed by the sea. And yet, this one didn't run, didn't growl, didn't slink back into the forest like most wild things would. He just stood there, tense but still, his body flickering between instinct and decision. Delilah placed her mug down on the sand, slowly, deliberately. "You're not lost," she whispered to the air. "You came here on purpose." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then the bobcat turned, padded down toward the waterline, and disappeared into the dunes. The second morning, he came back. This time, she was ready. Sitting cross-legged on the deck of her trailer, sketchpad resting in her lap, the same mug of bitter coffee steaming by her knee. She didn't look up when she heard the soft crunch of paws on dried seaweed. Didn't startle when she felt him watching. She simply turned the page, began sketching him from memory. He circled once, paused beneath the fraying fringe of her hammock, then sat. For 20 minutes they shared the silence. Two broken creatures, both just existing, separately but side by side. Delilah could feel her heartbeat slow, her lungs unclench. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it was something close to permission. By the third morning, she whispered aloud, "I think I'll call you Bramble." He had that look, like something you can't touch without bleeding, sharp around the edges, protective of his quiet, a little wild, a little wrecked. He didn't respond, of course not, but he stayed. The neighbors, what few there were, had stories about wild animals showing up after storms, that the mangroves shifted, that creatures got disoriented, hungry, but Delilah knew better. There was no panic in his movements, no hunger, no desperation, just a deliberate calmness. And it wasn't that he wanted anything from her, it was that he chose to come to her. One evening, Delilah brought an old cooler down from the porch, scrubbed it out, and filled it with fresh water. Set it beneath the driftwood log he always passed. She didn't watch him drink, just walked inside. But that night, just before dusk, she glanced out through the kitchen window. He was there, not drinking, just lying near it, looking at the porch, waiting. The next morning, Bramble approached a little closer. Delilah was resting in the hammock again, eyes closed but awake, when she heard the sand crunch, closer than usual. She opened her eyes slowly. There he was, 5 feet away. He sat, tucked his legs neatly beneath him, and then, for the first time, he yawned. It was such a simple thing, a yawn, but to her, it was everything. An animal doesn't yawn if it's afraid, doesn't let its guard down unless it feels safe. Delilah watched him stretch, his ribs expanding under the morning light, then curl into the sand like it was his own bed. She felt the breath catch in her throat. Not fear, but awe. By the end of the week, the hammock wasn't just hers anymore. Bramble never climbed into it, never crossed that invisible line of closeness, but he would lie beneath it, just inches from where her bare foot swayed lazily in the breeze. Some evenings, Delilah would talk aloud, not to him, not really, just into the wind. She talked about Caleb, about how the ocean took him, about how she'd stopped painting, how the salt air used to feel like freedom. Now it felt like a weight. Bramble would shift sometimes, blink slowly, and stay. There was a power in the stillness he brought. He didn't comfort her, didn't try to fix anything, but somehow his presence softened the sharpest edges inside her. It wasn't a friendship, not yet. But it was the beginning of something that had the shape of understanding. And when the sun dropped each evening, streaking the waves in gold, Delilah found herself hoping, more and more, that she'd see that familiar silhouette at the edge of the trees. Not because she needed him, but because somehow he needed her too. Delilah didn't expect him to come during the rain, but there he was. It was late, past midnight, and the wind had just started to tug at the palm fronds like a restless child. The downpour hadn't arrived yet, but the scent of a coming storm thickened the air. She was sitting on the trailer's front steps, wrapped in a faded quilt, sipping bourbon from a chipped mug. The kind of night that made her ache for Caleb so fiercely, she could barely breathe through it. That's when she heard the crunch, soft, deliberate, on the wet sand. He appeared from the edge of the mangroves, gliding through the dusk like something half real. Water clung to his fur in clumps, tail low, ears twitching against the pressure in the air. She blinked, thinking maybe the grief had conjured him again. But no, Bramble was real, and he was walking straight towards her. This time, he didn't stop 10 feet away. He kept coming. 4 feet, then 3. Then, he sat, right in front of her, close enough she could see droplets clinging to his whiskers. Delilah's throat tightened. She didn't reach for him, just whispered, "Me too." She didn't have to explain what. She knew he'd understand. The next morning, the beach was littered with branches and seaweed. Small fish stranded in shallow pools. Her wind chimes had snapped and scattered like broken glass across the porch. But Bramble was there, dry now, groomed, sitting on the porch railing like he'd been born there. Delilah stepped outside with a bowl of water. He didn't move. She paused beside him, then, very slowly, set the bowl down near his paws. He dipped his head, drank, not fast, not desperate, just like he belonged. From that day on, something shifted. Bramble started showing up not just at dusk, but in the morning too. Sometimes she'd open the door to find him stretched out in the shade of the kayak. Other times perched on the picnic table, watching the waves as if scanning for something only he understood. Delilah found herself adjusting to him. changing small things. She'd speak softly when she stepped outside, avoid slamming the screen door, play her music a little lower, and in return, Bramble offered more of himself. Little gestures, little graces. One afternoon, Delilah was working on a watercolor piece at the edge of the porch. She dropped her brush. It rolled down the steps into the sand. Before she could reach for it, Bramble padded forward, tapped the brush with his paw, then looked back at her, as if waiting. "Helpful now, are we?" she said, laughing gently. It was the first time she'd laughed out loud in months. That night, she brought her journal outside. Caleb's journal, the one the Coast Guard had returned to her after the storm. Water-damaged, warped, still stained with salt. But it was all she had left of him. She hadn't opened it in over a year. Bramble was already waiting beneath the hammock. Delilah sat down, hands trembling as she flipped open the first page. Caleb's handwriting was still intact in places, his sketches of ship systems, tiny stick figures of Delilah in diving gear, half-written to-do lists. She read aloud, "If the sky's still broken, I'll fix it. One sunrise at a time." Her voice cracked. She closed the book. Bramble stood up, walked slowly to her side. Then, for the first time, he touched her. His head nudged her ankle. Just once. A press. Then stillness. Delilah didn't move. Tears streamed silently, soaking the pages of a book already weathered by loss. And Bramble, he lay beside her, pressed close. Not for heat, not for safety, for presence. After that, everything became ritual. She'd open the door at dawn. He'd be there. She'd read. He'd listen. She'd cry. He wouldn't look away. In his quiet, Bramble held space for her. And in her presence, he found something gentler than the wild had ever given him. She began painting again. It started with a single piece. Bramble lying under the hammock, a soft wind brushing through his fur. Then another. Bramble watching seabirds at dusk, his ears tilted forward in curiosity. Delilah sent one of the paintings to her sister in Maine. She didn't expect a reply. But a week later, a postcard arrived. "He's beautiful. I'm glad something found you when nothing else could." It was the first word from her family since Caleb's death. One evening, as the sun melted into the sea, Bramble did something unexpected. Delilah was swaying gently in the hammock, sketching the waterline, when Bramble climbed the 2 porch steps, walked over, and sat with his side leaning against the hammock frame. She held her breath. He looked at her, eyes steady, calm. Then he lay down. Not beneath the hammock this time, beside it, so close her hand could reach him. And this time, she did. Gently, barely brushing his shoulder with her fingertips. He didn't flinch. That was the moment she stopped feeling like a broken woman hiding by the sea. She felt seen, not fixed, not forgotten, but chosen. It was the kind of storm that didn't give much warning, just a subtle shift in the wind, a grey line on the horizon, and then silence so deep, it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. Delilah noticed it around noon. The tide had begun rising faster than usual. The air felt heavy, charged, like static pressing against her skin. The seabirds flew lower. Even the palms stilled. She glanced out toward the mangroves, instinctively searching for Bramble. He wasn't there, not on the porch, not under the hammock. "Maybe he felt it first," she murmured. She gathered her laundry from the line, shut the trailer windows, and pulled the weather app on her phone. A tropical depression had shifted course. Now it was heading straight for the lower Keys. They had maybe 6 hours. By evening, the first drops were coming down in heavy, slanted sheets. The wind screeched through the metal gutters and rattled her windows like angry fists. And still, no Bramble. Delilah opened the door, squinting into the downpour. Her porch light flickered. The hammock thrashed violently in the wind, half twisted on its frame. "Bramble!" she called out. Nothing. No flash of fur. No movement in the dunes. She grabbed her raincoat, flashlight, and boots and stepped into the chaos. For an hour she searched. She called his name again and again, her voice nearly swallowed by wind. She climbed the muddy trail behind the mangroves where she'd seen him disappear some mornings. She slipped twice, once gashing her palm on a jagged branch, but kept going. Finally she found something. A smear in the mud. Feathers. And near it, tracks. Bramble's tracks. Large, deep, pacing in tight circles. Then, blood. A few fresh drops. Not much, but enough. Delilah's chest clenched. She called again, this time more urgently, scanning every tree, every rustling shape. But all she found was the howl of the wind and the sting of rain in her eyes. By the time she returned to the trailer, soaked and shaking, it was after midnight. She sat on the floor, still in her wet coat, clutching one of her sketches of Bramble in trembling hands. "I shouldn't have let you get close," she whispered. "I should have known. Wild things don't stay." The storm raged for 2 days. Delilah barely slept. She kept the porch light on through both nights, even as the power flickered in and out. She left the cooler filled with fresh water, set out his favourite driftwood log near the door, though she doubted he'd return. The house felt hollow again, like it had before he came, like it had the night Caleb didn't. On the third morning, the storm passed. The world outside was a mess of scattered debris and shattered quiet. The beach was carved into strange new lines. Her kayak had been tossed into a palm tree. The hammock was shredded and hanging like seaweed. She barely noticed. Instead, she scanned the horizon, the trail, the dunes. Still nothing. She sat on the steps again, her hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee she'd forgotten to sip. She closed her eyes. Then, a sound. Not the screech of a gull, not the rustle of palms. Something heavier, closer. Footsteps. Delilah opened her eyes slowly, afraid it might be a trick of the wind, but it wasn't. There, emerging from the mangroves, limping and soaked, was Bramble. Her heart stopped. He was caked in mud. His left front paw dragged slightly with every step. His side bore a scratch, shallow but fresh, and clutched in his teeth was something alive. A baby osprey, barely fledged, wings tangled in a strip of fishing line. Delilah froze, mouth parted. Bramble came forward, slow but steady, until he reached the bottom of her steps. Then he gently laid the osprey down. It blinked, weak but alive. Delilah stared at him, speechless. Tears began to fall. Thick, silent, unstoppable. "You brought it to me?" she choked out. Bramble sat down, lifted his injured paw briefly, then set it down again with a wince. Bramble didn't move for most of the morning after the storm. He lay curled near the porch steps, head resting on his uninjured paw, tail twitching slightly whenever the wind caught the edge of the tarp. His breathing was shallow but steady. Occasionally he opened one eye to watch Delilah move across the porch, quietly checking the baby osprey in its towel nest. She had named the bird Delta, after the place where the river meets the sea, where two currents, wild and opposite, converge and somehow still find harmony, like them. The wildlife rehab van arrived that afternoon. The volunteers were gentle. They wore soft voices and even softer gloves. Delilah didn't let them onto the porch. She brought Delta to them herself, wrapped in the same towel Bramble had seen her use to dry the kayak the day they first met. She kissed the little bird on the head. "You saved her," she whispered. Bramble watched the entire exchange from his corner. His body tensed when the van door shut and pulled away, but he didn't rise. Not yet. Not until Delilah returned and sat down next to him again, cross-legged and quiet. "I don't know what happened out there," she said softly, "but I know what it cost you." His ears flicked at her voice. She reached over, not bold, not assuming, and touched the edge of his fur, just a fingertip grazing the damp ridge of his spine. And this time, he didn't move away. In the days that followed, Bramble healed slowly. Delilah crushed turmeric and mixed it with coconut oil for the scrape on his side. She cut up strips of soft flannel to dry him when the evening rains came. And she began reading to him again. This time, not from Caleb's journal, but from a worn copy of Island of the Blue Dolphins. A story about surviving alone, about finding comfort in unexpected places. He seemed to like that. He'd twitch an ear when she turned the page, blink slowly when her voice dipped into a hush. Sometimes as she read, she'd look up and catch him watching her, not with curiosity, but something closer to calm. One night, Delilah was awakened by a sound outside. Not footsteps, not the scratch of claws. A voice. Software female. She stepped outside, barefoot on the porch, night air cool against her skin. 2 young volunteers from the rehab center stood just beyond the gate. One held a clipboard, the other a laminated badge that read, "Conservation Survey." "We're tracking bobcat sightings," one said. "We heard rumors about one that visits a trailer out here. A woman who swings in a hammock." Delilah glanced to her right. Bramble sat in the shadows beneath the kayak, silent, watching. She turned back. "No sightings here," she said. "Not the kind you can track." The women thanked her and left. Delilah watched until their taillights disappeared. Only then did she return to the hammock, and Bramble padded out of the shadows, sat beside her, untrappable, unmeasurable, wild, herring. She never posted videos, never made reels, never turned their story into something to chase. She knew better. Some bonds were too fragile to frame in pixels. Some miracles didn't want to be witnessed, just lived. But the stories still spread. The mailboat captain mentioned her to a friend. A kayaker said he saw a bobcat watching her from the dunes. A girl from the mainland drew fan art of a woman with a storm in her eyes and a bobcat at her feet. Delilah didn't mind. She smiled at it all. People need stories like theirs. They need to believe the wild isn't always hostile, that some wounds call out across species, that sometimes grief finds its reflection in fur and fang. She only asked that no one come looking, and somehow people respected that. The osprey, Delta, recovered fully. 6 weeks after the storm, the rehab center called. "She's ready," they said. "Would you like to release her?" Delilah's voice cracked. "Yes." They met on the dunes at sunrise. Delilah stood in her bare feet, holding the bird close. Delta was stronger now, her wings taut and golden in the light. Bramble was there too, sitting just behind the sea oats, watching. When Delilah opened her hands, Delta launched into the sky without hesitation. She didn't circle back, didn't pause. She flew hard and fast toward the ocean, and Delilah laughed. Actually laughed. It rang across the beach like something she hadn't heard since before Caleb was gone. Bramble stepped forward, eyes following the bird until she was a speck in the light. Then he turned to Delilah, came close, and, for the first time, rubbed his body gently against her leg. Not like a house cat, not like something tamed, but like a friend, a thank you, a goodbye, a beginning. In the months that followed, life softened. Delilah started painting again. Not commissions, not for clients, for children. She sent illustrated storybooks to pediatric hospitals across the state. Stories about Bramble, Delta, and a woman who lived beside the sea. Stories about healing, about courage, about the kind of love that doesn't need words. She